Good late afternoon, my friends. So we're still on chapter 5. I believe this is part 3, and we're going to delve deeper into personal contact with aliens. This is my UFO UAP study guide, handbook for first contact. For both lay people and scientists, academicians, and people who are just interested in the topic to varying degrees and want to give it an honest look. So, I want to start this by saying in my last video, I did say this is not my preferred topic only because I you have to deal with a lot of personal anecdotes and subjective reports, and there's not a lot of physical evidence or corroboration. But I want to start by giving a message to those who have had a contact. If they've had a contact, if they believe they've had a contact, I want to say, first of all, I respect you. I respect you enough to treat you like an adult. Okay, which means I presume that you're telling me the truth honestly, that you are an honest actor, and that you're not in trying to purposely deceive anybody. You're not just trying to have fun. You're not just trying to make money by selling a story. Okay, but because I also honor you as an adult, remember scientific inquiry and the scientific method is kind of an adversarial deal. It's a bit like stepping in the ring and saying, I want to be the champion of this weight division. Your opponent honors you by fighting you within the rules to the best of their ability. So that means I am going to expect you to be logical. I am going to expect you to show evidence. I am going to expect your story to be consistent, and so on and so forth, right? In other words, you're going to have to stand up to the same scrutiny that a pharmaceutical company would have to face if they said we have a better product for headaches or hypertension or something. The same type of scrutiny if someone who was an archaeologist says, I have evidence that there was a previously undiscovered, unexplored civilization in this part of the world. I will I will expect to pressure test it. I will expect evidence and consistency and integrity. Okay, and that's not a disrespect on you. That's a respect, a gesture of respect. I think there was something Inazo Nitobe wrote about in his book Bushido, The Spirit of the Samurai, and he talked about how honor comes to samurai when they fight a worthy opponent. And he said this is why a samurai should never hit his wife. Okay, because the woman, especially back then, was physically weaker than the man, that the woman is dependent on the husband for her living, her food, the care of her children, the future of her children, and it is like one is beating up on a small child in the street or a helpless animal, right? The woman in that society had almost no personal resources and no recourse. So to strike a woman, he said, is the most despicable of things. A man who would do that is not a samurai and is the worst of warriors if he can be worthy of that name. So an idea, right? An idea that claims reality, that claims truth, is treated like a samurai on the battlefield. It's not out of anger, it's out of respect and honor, okay? So, there are some things I can say as far as internal consistency and logic about this. The thing that really stands out is the Travis Walton case. Travis Walton, his story is consistent. Um, he talks about being levitated and a few things that are inconsistent with our current level of technology, but they're not inconceivable. He talks about being uh, taken into this craft and treated for the injuries the craft caused him by accident. and undergoing procedures, some of which were terrifying. Okay, and whenever he talks about it, he exhibits stress responses. I do not think that man is faking. I don't think the man is faked ever. I do not have the same opinion of Bob Lazar. I don't have a lot of confidence in him for those reasons. But people who don't respect people that talk about this subject treat them like they're crazy without listening to them, and they often impose red herrings and straw dogs on them. They're like, well, it doesn't make sense there'd be little green men traveling around from outer space probing people's anuses. And believe it or not, there are no accounts of that. There's no accounts of little green men. And I don't think there's one verified account of someone saying they were anally probed. And if there is, I mean, it is apparently not a common narrative. Okay? What people do talk about is the various types of aliens. Uh, common one is the grays, which come in tall, medium, and short size. The grays are interesting because they're humanoid. As a matter of fact, you're going to learn almost every alien I talk about is humanoid. It's a shape we see in nature with human beings, our relatives, chimpanzees. We're talking bipedal. Kangaroos are bipedal some of the time. Um, they don't have prehensile thumbs. And you have some upright creatures like mantises. We're going to get back to that. But the grays, the only thing that puzzles me is, let's pretend I believe completely in all these narratives and I say they're true. They're awfully thin. Their heads are oversized. I'm not sure how they support the head. And they don't look like they were meant to walk around in our gravity, but they look a heck of a lot like us. The big eyes, the lack of ears, and they walk around in our gravity and breathe our air, or at least they breathe an air that the abductees can breathe. So you see how puzzling that is. One theory I've heard is, what if they're from the future and they're our future selves, or if they're like an evolution of us in real time, and maybe they're distant relatives. It's hard to say. I've also heard people say maybe that's an exoskeleton or some type of robotic life form. So, again, very hard for me to process. But they're definitely bipedal. They have prehensile thumbs. They have a very similar structure to us, which, how do you process that they could be from so far away and look so much like us? I write about that a little bit in the book. Then you have the tall whites, the so-called Nordics, which appear to be pale, white or blonde-haired humans who, have sort of tall, thin builds, and oftentimes they're described with blue eyes, and yet they're kind of unusually tall and thin, and they're uncannily human, but they're uncannily not human. If I was to see something like this and know that it was not part of any existing nation, I would say that is a relative of Homo sapiens, or an offshoot of Homo sapiens, or a race of Homo sapiens. One theory I've heard is, what if sometime in the past, or multiple times in the past, these things were zipping around the northern zones, the northern hemisphere, and they captured some of these, Viking types, Nordic types, or proto Vikings. They took them off to their planet or their space station, and because there was a genetic bottleneck, they all look like that. And there is talk about hybridization, where humans are, sort of asked or coerced to mate with these humans, because there is some genetic problem with them. That would be very interesting. There's also talk of aliens that are, white or standard American type, but with variation, with darker hair, with, more earthly features. And there have been some accounts of encounters with aliens that were more swarthy, darker skinned, darker haired, um, not following the common European genotype. And again, what if if we say abductions are true or could be true? What if these are humans that have been transplanted to other places? I like the idea of a space station because the tall whites and Nordics and some of these humanoids, maybe their gravity is less than here on Earth, which is why they trend tall and they don't have a lot of natural lighting, which is why, they're not. There's not a lot of active melanocytes on them. That's interesting. Now, these there's also talk of reptilians and mantis creatures, which the mantis creature is the most puzzling because all of these creatures appear to be able to function in our gravity and atmosphere. A true insect that size could not exist in our atmosphere because they don't have true lungs and they don't get enough oxygen. Way back in prehistoric times, I'm talking millions of years ago, the Earth had more of an oxygen content, and that's why insects and arthropods were gigantic. And you had sea scorpions that could possibly sometimes walk on land. We're talking things that, a 6 foot tall man could lie down on one of them and lie down on it to its length. So that's something. The mantis ones are the most intriguing. The reptilians, they still appear to be humanoid, having bipedal locomotion with opposable thumbs. And we know that reptiles are related to mammals. They've been on this planet longer, and makes you wonder about the Silurian hypothesis. Right. If they are truly of alien origin with no connection to the Earth, then in order for them to function like that, they must have come here long ago and had a period of adaptation. Maybe they've even genetically engineered themselves to be able to do so. That's one thing, all right? Um, they look humanoid. Another thing is that these creatures tend to not wear environmental suits, spacesuits. They tend to even touch and interact that way with humans, if the accounts are to be believed. And again, I've talked about the pluses and minuses of that data. And, you know, they interact with us and they appear to know what we're about. They, I want to touch back again before closing this section. They, this talk about anal probing and things, again, it's not a common report. It may be completely apocryphal, which means not in the record, just something that arose folklorically out of the dialogue around this subject. But they, God, there's a lot to think about that, okay? There is a lot to think about that. But the examinations they do tend to be non-invasive, of a sophisticated nature, not necessarily cutting things and making people bleed and, say and things like that. It tends to be a lot of reports of things like sonograms, ultrasound, beams, rays, things that are held close to you and give them information. More Star Trek-y stuff. Medical technology that nowadays is kind of much more common and easier to understand, but back in the 40s, 50s, 60s would have puzzled people, right? It maybe would have seemed threatening. So that is something to remember. My next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the humanoid shape, and it's going to be a bit of a digression, but it's important.